This is the second in what I hope will be a series of webinars that is hosted by the, the Past Global Changes program, Pages, on topics that are related to data stewardship, data management sorts of topics. So my name is Daryl Kaufman. I'm one of the Science Steering Committee members of Pages, and I've been especially involved in one of Pages' integrative activities. It's called data stewardship. The integrative activities in Pages were set up as sort of cross-cutting projects that relate to a number of the working groups that Pages oversees. It was developed because of the important role that data plays in advancing paleosciences, especially at the global level. And our speaker today is from the World Data Service for Paleoclimatology. It's one of NOAA's Centers for Environmental Information. And Pages and NOAA Paleoclimatology really kind of grew up together in the early 90s, and they've had a long-standing cooperative relationship. They have shared goals of ensuring the long-term data archival and promoting their reuse and data syntheses and data model comparisons. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Professor Carrie Morrill. She has her PhD from the University of Arizona, where she studied the century variability in Asian monsoon over the Holocene. And then she spent several years as a postdoc and a project scientist with the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder. And for the past 15 years, she's been a research scientist at the Cooperative Institute for Research in Environmental Sciences series, which is at the University of Colorado. And that position is joint with the World Data Service for Paleoclimatology at NOAA. So she's one of sort of the, what I consider rare paleoscientists who has strong expertise in both proxy climate data as well as in model simulations of Earth systems. She develops large data syntheses to compare with the output of Earth system models to better understand the causes and the impacts of past climate changes. There's a couple of others who are on the call today from the World Data Service for Paleoclimatology, and they'll be helping to answer questions following Carrie's presentation. Her presentation is Promoting Fair Data Principles in NOAA's World Data Service for Paleoclimatology. She'll be demonstrating some of the new products, some of the new services at NOAA Paleoclimatology, and she'll be telling us about the processes that for those of us who contribute data to the World Data Service. And hopefully more of you will be doing that after this presentation. So, Carrie?
Thanks, Daryl. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Let's see. And set up my slides. So can everyone see my title slide? It looks okay. So thanks also to Pages and Mary France and Sarah for setting up this discussion, this opportunity to share ideas and information and have a broader discussion about data stewardship. So I will be talking about work we've been doing recently at the WDS Paleo, building around this theme of promoting fair principles. And I'll define in a couple of minutes what fair principles are. But first, I wanted to point out our list here of team members who work to support the WDS Paleo. And we're a team that works for several different employers. Therefore, you can see the several different icons here. Some of us work directly for the National Centers for Environmental Information at NOAA's, or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And some of us work to support the WDS Paleo as employees of either the University of Colorado at Boulder or the team of government contractors at Riverside. So, and this team does everything from taking data contributions from contributors ingesting these, building and maintaining the database that houses the data contributions, and providing web access and searches to make the data freely available. So the World Data Service for Paleoclimatology probably doesn't need much of an introduction for this audience, since we have been one of the principal repositories for paleoclimate data in the World Data System of ICSU since 1992. I did want to highlight two more recent developments for the WDS Paleo, and that's that we entered into a scientific partnership agreement with Pages last year. And this kind of formalizes the longstanding relationship we've had with Pages in terms of helping to ensure that data are open and freely available. And I also wanted to point out that our acting director, Gene Wall, retired at the end of last year. And since his retirement, our new acting director is Dr. Imke Dura of NOAA's NCEI. So I have a couple of goals in this webinar. First, I want to introduce the FAIR principles and what that means, and then demonstrate some new search and retrieval functions from our website, and then describe the new Paleo Environmental Standard terms, or PASS thesaurus, that we developed that we use to describe measured variables and to power a new search by variable or search by measured parameter. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about data contribution processes by reviewing both new and existing requirements for individual data contributors, as well as discussing some best practices for transitioning Pages working group databases or syntheses to the WDS Paleo as a permanent archive. So first, the FAIR data principles. These data principles were laid out in a paper published in Nature Scientific Data back in 2016 by Mark Wilkinson and co-authors. And these co-authors include a wide range of stakeholders in academia, industry, funding agencies, and publishing. And the acronym FAIR is referring to Findable, Accessible, Interoperable, and Reusable. And the goal here is to enhance the ability of both machines and humans to reuse research data. And I think this last point is really important as we're moving towards making more and more large data compilations and applying various algorithms to these compilations. And you'll see this theme of both machine readability and human readability throughout some of the new products and services that I'll demonstrate. So digging in a little bit more into the findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and what each of these things in practice mean. Findability, having a globally unique and persistent identifier is important. For example, a digital object identifier, or DOI, and I'll be talking a little bit more later about our progress in assigning dataset DOIs to datasets at the WDS Paleo. Findability also relies upon having rich metadata, which allows for discovery via different search mechanisms. Accessibility is about being freely available and obtainable. And of course, this is a key tenet of the World Data System. Interoperability means the data are syntactically parsable and semantically understandable. Basically, another way of saying that computers can act upon the data and metadata, I guess I should say. Standardized vocabularies is an important part of this, enabling us to compare apples to apples. And also having connections to other data and metadata sources, kind of building webs and linkages across different data sources and different data repositories. And then last, for reusability, it's important that data are sufficiently described and shared with the least restrictive license, that they also meet domain relevant community standards, and that they have detailed provenance tracking. So in other words, tracking the original source of the data and perhaps how they get reused or updated through time. So as I said, the FAIR principles were developed by a broad range of stakeholders, And since their publication, they have been endorsed by an even broader range of funding programs, governmental entities, the science data community, national science academies, repositories, publishers, individual researchers, and more. So I think a lot of people have found this description of what we're aiming for in terms of free, open, and reusable data useful. And we have too, and we've used it in guiding some of the products and services that we've been developing. So what are these products and developments? There are a couple that I will be demonstrating. So these are recent developments at the WDS Paleo that are relevant to FAIR and to Pages activities. And I will be showing our dataset bulk download, which is a way to download multiple datasets at the same time. Our application programming interface, going back to exposing data more to computers and computer programming. Our controlled terms for measured variables, which I've mentioned, the Paleoenvironmental Standard terms are past Thesaurus with the new search capability that goes along with that. And digital object identifiers, or DOIs, for datasets. I'll give a progress update on where we are with that. So actually, for the first part of my demonstration, I wanted to show a feature that some of you, if you've visited our website over the past couple months, might have noticed. And this is a series of overlays that appear when you visit our website that give you tips and tricks for using our search. And I have a video here. Let's start it. So the first time you visit the site, the overlays will pop up, but you can always re-access them by clicking here. And this is kind of what they look like. Let me pause. So they'll step you through the website as you're clicking next or previous to go forward or backward. And they give tips about different parts of the website, how to, in this case, use the general search. There are some tips here about using logical parameters like and or, and wildcards like the %sign. And these, here's another example. So going down to publishers and data type, this just explains what we mean by those things. And there are these overlays for both our main search page, our search results page, and our Thesaurus navigator that I'll be showing later. So I highly encourage using that to learn a few things about our website. In fact, during our process of creating those overlays, I learned a few things too. So the next thing I wanted to show is downloading datasets in bulk. So this is this is actually a response to a long-standing user request to not have to download datasets one by one, but instead, can't I select multiple datasets and get them all at once? So for this, I'm just doing a search here. We'll choose ice cores for our data type. Come down here to location, and I'm using the filter box to find Canada, and I select it to shuttle it over. And here there's 13 results for ice cores in Canada. Now you can use these buttons here to either select all of the search results or select none of them, and you can select them individually as well. And then click Preview Data Download, which will show the files that you're about to download. And then click to download selected data, and the data will be available as a zip here that you can click on the zip and download it. And building off of this is the same search I just showed, a screen capture of it. And right above the search results, there is the API URL for these parameters. So the API is the application programming interface, and it allows to make searches for various, all of the same parameters you can make in the GUI or the search that I just showed, like search by location or by author or by measured variable type, but to do it in a more programmatic way such that you could call it through a computer program and actually get results that way as a way of kind of automating the search so that a human doesn't have to be interacting with the GUI. Oh, and that just shows the orange box around what I was just talking about, the API URL. All right, so the Paleoenvironmental Standard terms are past Thesaurus. This is a controlled vocabulary for measured variables that we have been developing over the past couple of years. And this diagram here on the left, which shows this kind of tree structure, is a visualization of what part of the controlled vocabulary looks like. So you'll notice, of course, the tree structure. There's parent terms and then kind of organizing terms like chemical properties or physical properties. And then as you move down to the leaves of this tree, these are the terms that you would use to describe measured variables. So things like delta 18O or density. And we had three main design principles in formulating this vocabulary. First is that it should be extensible, meaning that we need to add to it through time. We get new contributions. People are developing new proxies, have new terms to describe what they've measured. We need to have a way of making it grow through time. Next is sustainability, which is finding a balance between being specific enough to have a good measured variable search, but not so specific that we end up curating every species of diatom that anybody's ever measured, for example. And then last, to be connected. So when possible, we used existing vocabularies, and there's a few out there that were pretty useful, like the units ontology, or there's taxonomic ontologies. And we found ways to link our terms to other controlled vocabularies or ontologies. And I should mention that this project was supported by the US National Science Foundation, and that this web link right here brings you to a page that describes more about the past thesaurus and also provides access to our governance documents that explains how we want to manage this vocabulary through time. So this is a screen capture of one of our WDS Paleo templated data sets, just to show you what I mean when I'm talking about measured variable names. And so the measured variables here are in the orange box right in the middle. And this particular data set has, in the data table, has 6 different data columns. There's age and 5 different temperature time series. And each one of these columns of the data table has a variable name associated with it. But we found it wasn't enough to just give these columns a very simple name. The name needed multiple components to really explain what was being measured. So that's what you'll see in the orange box. There's 10 different components or subcomponents to each variable name, and these are separated by commas. And on the next slide, I'll describe what these are. So the 10 subcomponents of variable names are the what, which is the description of what was measured, and this would be something like delta 018. Material, or the material on which measurements were made. That could be a particular type of thorium or coral, for example. The error, which is the temporally variable uncertainty that applies to the measured value. The units. The data type, which is one of the WDS defined proxy or reconstruction data types. Seasonality, which applies to reconstructions, and it's the specific part of the annual cycle that has been reconstructed from raw values. Details, which describes any alterations or transformations made to raw data, such as averaging or correcting or smoothing. Methods, which can include information about the instrument type being used, the analytical technique, or even some of the statistical methods that were used for the reconstruction. And then data format, which is either a C or an N, and it defines whether values are character-based or numeric. And then last, our 10th subcomponent is additional information. And this is a free text format field, so you don't have to use terms in the past thesaurus for this field. And this field is useful for providing more details about any of the above or something else that didn't get captured by the other 9 subcomponents. And the additional information field is very useful, I think, for some of the pages working group syntheses, because often these syntheses have additional information they're tracking about measured variables that may or may not fit with past thesaurus terms. So this would be a place to store that sort of information. And 3 of these subcomponents are highlighted in blue: the what, the material, and the seasonality. And these are the subcomponents that are now searchable on our search page, which I will demonstrate in a second. But first, I wanted to give a couple of statistics about PASS, just to give you a sense of the effort that went into this. So there are more than 2,800 controlled terms in PASS. 1,900 of these are preferred terms, which means these are terms you would use in one of the controlled 9 subcomponents of a variable name. 200 of them are meta terms, or these are kind of the parent or organizing terms that kind of give the tree its structure. And 700 are non-preferred terms, and these are things like acronyms or abbreviations or alternate spellings for preferred terms that we're tracking just to help make sure that we're all on the same page about our terminology. And so we created this thesaurus with all these controlled terms and then applied the controlled terminology to almost all of the data sets housed by the WDS Paleo. And this meant making variable names for more than about 100,000 time series. And we had help on the development of the thesaurus, on the creation of the controlled terminology, from 25 subject matter experts who were providing input to us through 6 virtual panels. And we couldn't have done this without their input, given the heterogeneity of paleo proxy measurements. So I was going to give a quick demonstration of how to do a measured variable search using the past terminology. But first, I wanted to give an example of how a measured variable search would have been done before our new variable search. And so for this, I'm going to use the general search, which is our free text search, which is here at the very top of the page. And I'm going to be searching for delta C13 measurements that were measured on benthic forams. And for this, I'm going to throw all the tricks at it. I'm using ands and ors, wildcards, because delta C13 can be spelled a lot of different ways. Foram can be plural or singular, and we'll see what comes up. And for the search results here, there are 60 studies. And so let me pause for a second. So what I was doing there was I was actually searching free text in abstracts, publication titles, study description and notes, etc. Anything that's in kind of the metadata for these studies. But so next, I am going to try to use the new measured variable search. So for the what, it would be delta C13. I use the filter box here to find it, shuttle it over to choose it. And the material is going to be benthic 4am. And this came up with 178 studies. So this, I think, points to the richness of the metadata now that we have added to the studies by adding measured variable terminology to all of them, and the power now of being able to find, to sift through and find a lot more in our data holdings. So next I was going to demonstrate choosing one of these search results and how to look at the variable information. So I'm going to choose this 4th one here. And we scroll down, and you can click on the Show Data File Variables and be able to see these are the variables. They're the time series that are in this particular file. And there's one important point I want to make here. So I searched for delta C13 on benthic forams. This returned as a search result because Cibicidoides woolstorfi is a benthic foram. So this kind of shows the power of our tree structure. So benthic foram is in the tree, but it's not one of the leaves. There are children of benthic foram, and the Cibicidoides species is one of them. So by searching for benthic foram, any study with that term or a more specific child term gets returned. And then here I'm going to scroll down and look at this other table at the bottom, and this shows all the variable names in the study. But these variable names are each live links. So, and if I'm going to show what happens when I click on one, I'm going to click on magnesium, calcium. And it's going to bring us to our past Thesaurus navigator. And this is a way to learn more about the terms in the past thesaurus. So this is the thesaurus entry for magnesium, calcium. You have the term title, the definition. This next shows the hierarchy under which it exists. We have a non-preferred term here, which is the abbreviation. Its parent or broader term is element or compound ratio. And its related terms, these are the WDS Paleo data types that use this particular term are listed here. And I think next, what I'm showing that this tree structure up here, these are live links, and you can use this to navigate through the thesaurus. So I just went back up high in the hierarchy to what, and now I'm stepping back down through another set of branches to the temperature variable. And then I clicked on show hierarchy to show how you can get a visualization of the tree structure. And so this is a visualization of the thesaurus term I clicked on, which is temperature variable, and then all of its children. You can see we have lots of different sorts of varieties of temperature in the thesaurus. And the numbers in parentheses after each of these terms are the number of studies that have measurements for that particular term. And so these also you can click on in order to navigate around. And I'm going to click on sea surface temperature and then go look at that thesaurus entry. And here's sea surface temperature. So there's one other feature I wanted to point out, and that's this Find Studies button. So I'm right now at sea surface temperature. If I click on Find Studies, that's the same as doing a search from our main page for any study that has the sea surface temperature measured variable. So on the topic of the thesaurus, I also wanted to point out that we are providing the thesaurus in Scouse format, and Scouse stands for the Simple Knowledge Organization System. And it's possible to download the Scouse using this link at the bottom of any of the thesaurus entries. And Scouse is a standard format for sharing vocabularies. And I have a snippet here on the next page. It's mostly for computers, although it is somewhat human readable. Each one of this actually shows, I think, 3 of our terms. And these are all from the elemental ratio branch of our tree, and it contains the same information that you're seeing on the thesaurus pages. So it has the definition, the preferred term, non-preferred term, the parents, the related terms, etc. And this is a way to share information about the thesaurus in a more machine readable or computer operable way. And this kind of goes back to the theme of fair and promoting interoperability between different controlled vocabularies, different data sets, and different data repositories. So I have one demonstration. This is not necessarily a new feature, but I think it's important, especially from the FAIR context. And this is our search where you can search both the WDS Paleo and our partners Neotoma and Pangea simultaneously. And this also kind of plays on the FAIR interoperable principle. So there's a couple things I wanted to point out here. You can select Neotoma and Pangea by clicking on these boxes. But as soon as you've selected other data centers, some of your search options get a little bit more limited because our metadata haven't been completely standardized across the 3 repositories. So what I did here was I decided I wanted to do a location search. So I clicked on the box tool and drew the box that I wanted. You can see some of these other search options are not available when you're doing a cross-repository search. And here, there are 1,147 results. And you can tell the data center using this colored box in front of the dataset title. So here I've selected a Neotoma dataset, and I'm going to show how you can click on this online research to actually visit the dataset at Neotoma. So we just are harvesting metadata from these other repositories, not the actual data. And so the link will take you off of our site and to their site to actually download the data. And here's an example for Pangea. Cool, and there you have it. Now we're at Pangea. So next, a progress update on our dataset digital object identifiers in progress. So currently we have assigned dataset DOIs to nearly all of the tree ring datasets in the International Tree Ring Data Bank. And we're working on our workflows and processes for assigning dataset DOIs to all of our other legacy WDS Paleo datasets, as well as having a workflow in place to assign DOIs to new contributions. So stay tuned for more on that. So looking ahead to the future, what are some of the things that we're thinking about doing next? Well, one of our goals is to complete templating of legacy data sets so that all data are machine readable. So about 20% of our data sets are not in the WDS Paleo template format or another machine readable format. And we will be, hopefully over the next couple of years, converting those to a machine readable format. Next is to standardize chronology information. So our radiocarbon or uranium thorium tables, for example, are not in a standardized format, which means they cannot be machine read or read by a computer and operated upon. So we plan to create standard formats for those and then apply those formats retroactively to our legacy data sets. And this will help a lot in terms of automating the process for creating new age models, updating based on updated calibrations, updated algorithms, et cetera. And then last is to track dataset provenance. So we are working on building some infrastructure in our database to track the source of data sets and how data sets have been reused. And this has become more important as more data compilations have been contributed, and we're seeing data sets being reused. So it's nice to kind of track that to give users the ability to see how different data sets have been used in different ways through time, as well as to look for updates to particular data sets. So comments, suggestions, and ideas about this. Many of our products and services kind of have grown out of longstanding user requests. And we use user requests in many ways to kind of plan for future projects. So we welcome any comments, suggestions, or ideas that people have. There are a couple different ways to give us those ideas. One is to email paleo@noaa.gov. We also have a user survey on our website, and this is the URL here, and the user survey has a spot to provide different comments. And of course, as I open this up at the end for comments and discussion, I would love to hear any suggestions or ideas you have then too. But my last topic is talking about contributing data to the WDS Paleo, either as an individual contributor or as part of, say, a Pages working group who's made a large data compilation. So this is our website for contributing data. And I'm just going to show a couple of important things in this table. First is the general instructions for how to contribute data. There's 3 steps. It's pretty simple. The first step is that use one of our data contribution templates, which I'll show you in a second. And then step 2 is to email them to paleo@noaa.gov. And step 3 is we will be in touch and you can review the contribution. I should mention that we have more specific instructions if you are submitting tree ring data or fire history data. So if that is the case, pay attention to these links here. And down here, and the contribution templates and controlled lists is where you'll find the data contribution templates. We have either a text-based or a Microsoft Excel-based contribution template that can be used. They both do the same thing. Some people just prefer the Microsoft Excel because their data are already in that format. And then there's some information here about our past thesaurus and naming your variables. So take a look at those. We require that all new contributions follow the past thesaurus. And my last point I wanted to make on this slide was that we have a data management plan, a draft data management plan. This was a request of the National Science Foundation, the U.S. National Science Foundation, for us to provide, and it's very helpful for anyone who is applying for funding through the U.S. National Science Foundation in terms of designing and providing their data management plan. So in summary, use our WDS Paleo templates, either the text or the Excel. There's special instructions for tree ring and fire history data, and please use the past thesaurus to describe your variables. So briefly, Pages working groups. So the WDS Paleo has been the permanent repository for several different Pages working group products, including maybe most notably the Pages 2K. And I don't have a lot extra to add for instructions for data synthesis projects, other than please designate a liaison and contact WDS Paleo staff early in your research and development to kind of make a plan with us about the best way to transition your product to a long-term permanent archive. So this is just repeating what I said. See the data synthesis project section of our contribution page and communicate early and often with us. And this is the best way to get in contact with us, is paleo@noaa.gov. So thank you for listening. I know at least some of you have been contributing data to the WDS Paleo, so thank you for your contributions. I wanted to open it up for questions or discussions. If there's any questions about things I've presented, comments, suggestions, ideas for future directions, or just discussion about data stewardship in general. So thanks, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that very informative presentation, Carrie. Let's see. The participants, the chat is available to ask questions, or I believe that you can open your microphones if you want to go ahead and raise your hand. I'll try to take a look here, and maybe Sarah can help me keep track of that as well. So questions, please. Let's see. Well, maybe while folks are maybe typing in their questions on the chat, I'd like to ask Carrie or others there in the group if you can give us an idea about sort of the scope of the NOAA Paleoclimatology database. I mean, the title has paleoclimate, and several of the named variables that you mentioned are specific to climate variables. But I also know that you archive fire histories and other sort of paleoenvironmental kinds of data sets. And maybe this gets into a little bit of the interoperability. And so, a lot of the Pages projects and others participants on this call, I'm sure, have data sets that may not be specific to climate variables. And so does NOAA Paleoclimatology accept paleoenvironmental data of all sorts, or do you refer certain kinds of data sets like assemblage data to other data archives? Or what would be your recommendation?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Daryl. It's one of the reasons why we named the paleo environmental standard terms or past thesaurus paleo environmental rather than paleoclimate, is because we have so much data that's not strictly paleoclimate, that's more paleo environmental, paleo ecological. So yes, we do take contributions that are larger, broader than just paleoclimate. I think fire history, as you mentioned, is a really good example of that. But as you said, there are certain types of data that might be better housed elsewhere. For example, our partner Neotoma archives paleo assemblages, so whether it be pollen or diatoms, and they do a great job of curating those down to maintaining specific species names and keeping all of that taxonomy straight. And we don't do that. So if you do have assemblage data kind of in that vein, Neotoma would probably be a better home for your data. But otherwise, what we accept is very broad. And Wendy, do you have anything more you want to add on that? Actually, maybe Bruce would be. Most of our team is here and ready to answer questions. So I am going to, how do I can make Bruce a host to see if Bruce has anything he would like to add. I think you can say anything, Bruce, if you would like. Maybe not. I might have messed something up.
Bruce or Wendy, I think you just need to activate your microphone if you'd like to speak.
I might have
this
covered
is Bruce. Am I audible?
Hi, Bruce. We can hear you.
Go ahead. Bruce. Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Sorry about that. Yeah, the scope of the archive is about 10,000 data sets. For some types, a single collection is a study, and in other cases, if a paper used a dozen different studies, then that would be a single study with multiple sites. Certain data types, such as pollen data, are being handled by a Neotoma, and they have the expertise with the taxonomy that we don't have. So most of the raw proxy pollen and macrofossil data are with Neotoma. Generally, everything else, I think, is coming to us. We have both proxy data sets and climate reconstructions and some climate model output. And altogether, about 10,000 sites within our archive here available for free download.
Great. Thank you, Bruce. That helped a lot. Yeah. Okay. Hey, Carrie, I'm hoping maybe you can see the chat. There are several questions there. Do you want to go ahead and take them on your own?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just start at the top. So Nick McKay, you mentioned that you're planning on adding data provenance, which is great. Can you expand a bit on the plan for that? Will the provenance be included within each data set, or will there be a registry on your website database? This is a great question. We are still trying to work this out. So if you have any suggestions for us or things that you would like to see, please let us know. I think the idea was that we would have additional database tables, and in order to track this information, of course, then we have to populate those tables in some way. But this information would display on study landing pages in some way, shape, or form. So still early early days in figuring that out. So please let us know if you have any ideas for us. So next, Santosh Shah, the DOI for the database can be used as links to go back to the data directly. I think this is referring to the dataset DOI I showed for the example tree ring dataset. And yes, you can click on that, and that will always bring you back to that data set. So it's a persistent identifier that will always resolve and point you to the data set. If I didn't capture what that question was asking, go ahead and enter it in the chat again. Next, Jack Hutchings. Expanding on Daryl's scope question, what about non-paleo modern data whose primary function is in calibrating and or understanding paleo archives? Yeah, that's a great question. We have some data like that. People will often contribute it as part of their paleo study. And it's one of the reasons why we have a data type called instrumental that kind of captures that kind of data. So I think those data are extremely valuable in terms of documenting what calibration was used, and other people could generate other calibrations from them through time. So I would say yes, please submit those data if you want to share them. Do any of our team, Bruce or Wendy, have anything you want to add on that? No? Okay. Will Daniels, thanks, Carrie. You just touched on the taxonomic question with regards to diatoms, but a similar issue arises with biomarkers. So is it preferred to contribute calculated indices, or are there options for contributing raw data? For example, with GDGTs, I see the Thesaurus has MBT index, but not the peak area or relative abundance of various compounds. Is this better placed in Neotoma? Yeah, that's a really good question too, and I don't have a clear answer for that. For the example for GDGTs, I think our thesaurus term is pretty broad. It's not, we don't go down to the level of individual types of GDGTs, although those can be put in the additional information, and people have contributed raw GDGT measurements. So for when you have multiple GDGTs, in that case, your what term would be GDGT, and then the additional information would describe which GDGT it is. So it's possible. This is, something we've struggled with about the specificity of the controlled terms and how specific we should get. I think for the time being, we would be a good place to house this data. I'm not sure that Neotoma has a collection. I think they've mostly focused on, and it's too bad there's no one from Neotoma here to correct me, on pollen and diatoms and a couple of other assemblage data. At some point in the future, it could be, and this is something that our partnership with Neotoma, it's kind of a long-term goal to try to work this out about what's the most appropriate place for which type of data. So yeah, that's a great question. Anybody want to add about anything to that? We're good. The next question, Paul Butler, another great question. Is the past ontology consistent with or identical to the linked Earth lipid ontology? It is not identical to. I think they're complementary to each other. Past has a very specific goal in mind, and that's to describe measured variables, whereas the linked Earth lipid ontology is much broader in terms of providing the structure to hold metadata and data more generally. And And so it's possible, they're complementary, that you can use past terms within the lipid framework. And we are working with Nick and Julian to create a lipid, a NOAA standard for lipid that would enable you to store information like past terms within the lipid framework. So not the same, but complementary, I would say. And I don't know if Nick, should I bring you up, Nick, if you want to say more about that? All right, I've promoted you to presenter. Oh, okay. He says, I think you described it well. All right.
I can see you too. But yeah, that was good. The linked earth ontology primarily describes the relationships between the different variables without actually providing sort of naming guidelines for what to call things, which is what past is focused on. So they're complementary.
Cool. Thanks, Nick. Sorry for putting you on the spot. Let's see. Bronwyn, is it possible to add improved functionality to search for a data set by the publication DOI, ideally searching both NOAA, WDS, and Pangea at the same time? Thanks. That's a great idea. I think that would be technically possible because the DOI, the publication DOIs are in our database. So thank you. We will add that to our list of user requests.
This is Bruce. I believe that in the case where we've already stored, you can already do that with our general search because it's showing up on our landing page and in our database. So try the general search for a DOI, and I believe that should already work in cases where we have that DOI stored for the underlying publication, which I believe is the majority. So it should already function.
Okay, Bronwyn followed up. I have tried the general search. It does not work, even when the DOI is stored. Yeah, so we'll look into that and see if there's a way we can make that work better.
This is Wendy. The reason why the general search might not work so well is because there's lots of special characters according to the search in the DOI itself that would all have to be delimited. But we could definitely look into a fielded search for that type of capability.
Cool. Thank you, Wendy. Let's see. Oh, and thank you, Will, for following up about the biomarker database. I think Neotoma has been working on a biomarker database, but there isn't a lot in there yet. Yeah, so check back with Neotoma. That might be a good place to have raw GDGT measurements, but we're happy to take those in the meantime as well. And let's see. Concerning archiving early during a project, is it possible to archive data sets as a password protected under moratorium prior to publication acceptance, including DOI assignation? Yeah, thanks. Yes, we get requests for this, often because of the publishers wanting the data sets to be under moratorium. And this would be a good question for Bruce to answer. I think he would do a better job than me. Are you able to take this one, Bruce?
Yes. The short answer is no. We don't have a method for password protecting, so we can make a landing page public, and with a portion of the data set, we can simply have a placeholder data file that says this data is coming. But it's either public or it's not. We don't have any halfway in our system. It is a public archive, so our primary function is to make data public. We can create a landing page and make that public with just a README file that says these data will be released upon publication of the paper. but that's the best we can do. We can't really allow data to be seen by reviewers, but not by the public. So we can make it public, or we can keep it offline, but we cannot do a hybrid.
So this is a little bit off topic. This is Wendy. If you need a reserved DOI so that it can be placed in your publication, but not be public until you're ready for it to be, you can let us know that that is the case and you need to reserve a DOI so that you can provide it to the journal.
Cool. Thank you, Wendy and Bruce. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So I'll pass it back to you, Daryl.
Okay, well, thanks very much. It looks like actually the timing is wonderful. We scheduled an hour and we're just about there now. So unless there are any further questions, I want to thank you again, Carrie, and for your team at NOAA for the fantastic presentation and all the services that you provide the paleo communities. And thank you to Pages for the organizers. And we're looking forward to another webinar here in the future. So thanks everybody for joining, and have a great day.
Just one last word. Thank you all. And if you know anybody who missed this, it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, and the link will be available on the Pages website. We will also be holding another webinar tomorrow. It will be the recording of this webinar with a live question and answer session. And that's 3 hours later than it was today in whatever time zone you're in. So please do let people know if you enjoyed this and want to spread the word. Thanks very much.